Leah Newman, I'm the gallery director and curator here. Welcome to our artist talk tonight with Patrick Dougherty. Thanks for joining us. Many of you are familiar with the significant collection of sculpture here on campus. We began collecting this work with the gift of a Rodin that's in our atrium. That was a gift from the Pepper family on the occasion of the dedication of the Belk Visual Arts Center in 1993. And since then, the collection has really grown tremendously, picking up speed around 2007 when we dedicated Richardson Plaza as sort of the nucleus of the sculpture garden, and we've been growing outward from there. We currently have 14 large-scale works in the collection, 10 are outdoors, and we've really thought about the collection holistically, so thoughtfully considered artists that we wanted to add, the materials that they work in, their concepts. And over the last couple of years, we've been really diligent about considering who's represented or reflected in the works that are really thought to be permanent works on campus. And as the collection has grown, it's also been important for us to continue thinking about what we can say, or maybe more specifically what artists can say or are saying through sculpture right now. And how can we continue to add to this growing conversation? One consideration for us has been through temporary or short-term projects. So we're really lucky that when we started thinking about these kind of ephemeral ideas, ephemeral materials, that we had sponsors, supporters like Marcy and Steve Sands, who were willing to support a project that might only be on our campus for 1, 2, maybe 3 years. Even though the project is short-term, this work by Patrick Dougherty, we think, will still reframe our environment. It will help us see the landscape in a new way, but it will engage in a different kind of dialogue than other works currently on our campus. It will engage in a dialogue around time and materials, specifically ephemeral materials. It will be an important addition to the collection in the engagement around collaboration and participation. That's really new for the works on our campus, and many of you have already participated and taken part in either gathering materials over the last few weeks and now in constructing the work. And also, when it's complete, we think this work will deepen the conversation that's already present, but deepen the conversation around how we engage in a really physical, sort of bodily way with sculpture. So when we thought about the creation of ephemeral work on campus, I honestly could not think of a more fitting artist than Patrick Dougherty. He was born in Oklahoma, raised in North Carolina, earned a BA in English from the University of North Carolina, and an MA in Hospital and Health Administration from the University of Iowa, and then returned to the University of North Carolina to study art history and sculpture. Combining his carpentry skills with his love of nature, he began to learn more about primitive techniques of building and started experimenting with tree sapling as his construction material. His first individual work, called Maple Body Wrap, was exhibited in 1982 at the North Carolina Biennial Artist Exhibition, which was sponsored by the North Carolina Museum of Art. And the following year, he had his first solo exhibition. It's a pretty quick move. First piece exhibited, first solo show within 2 years at the Southeastern Center for Contemporary Art in Winston-Salem. And from there, his work evolved from single pieces on sort of conventional pedestals to more of what we're familiar with today, monumental scale environmental works. And we can attest they require about a truckload of materials to make. Over the last 30 years, he's built about 250 of these works and has really become internationally acclaimed. His sculptures have been seen worldwide, and it's been really fun over the last few weeks to have folks stop by and have that moment of recognition where they say, I saw this artist's work in Hawaii or Japan or somewhere else around the globe. He's received numerous awards, including the Factor Prize for Southern Art, the North Carolina Artist Fellowship, Pollock-Krasner Foundation Grant, Henry Moore Foundation Fellowship, the Japan-U.S. Creative Arts Fellowship, and the National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, to name a few. And before I turn it over to Patrick, I just want to thank a few folks. So thanks to all the volunteers. Thanks to everyone who's already participated. I see several of you here, and those of you who are coming in the next 2 weeks to help us finish the project. Thanks to Elizabeth Harry, our gallery and collection coordinator, because she has been helping coordinate all of the volunteers. Also, the folks in physical plant, particularly Charles Jolly, and also David Holthauser and Jamie Moore. We could not have done this project without them, and physical plant are really our best collaborators on campus. The project would also not have been possible without the dedication and work of Professor of Art Court Savage and David Sackett, the art department technician. They have literally spent more time than anyone else gathering and hauling materials, again, a tractor trailer load. So thank you to everyone. And then of course to Marcy and Steve Sands, who are not with us tonight, but they will join us on February 21st when we sort of dedicate or unveil the project at 4:30 at the site, and I hope that you will join us as well. Please help me welcome Patrick Dougherty.
Thank you very much, and I do have to second that, all that gathering. We've been using these good materials up without even thinking about it, about all the tragedy of being out there in the rain and gathering. You know, my son Sam, he's my assistant now, but when he was a kid, he had a children's book about 3 bears that encounter urban sprawl. Well, these bears, they go up over a hill near their den one morning, they look down, and somebody's built a shopping center overnight. Well, already the people are walking up and down the sidewalk. They all look so satisfied. The little bears, they're not sure they're happy anymore. And somewhere they find people clothes. In the next sequence of pictures, you see these little pint-sized figures moving amongst the legs of all the other passers-by. And the caption reads, well, now that they're like everybody else, are they really happy? So no, not really, because underneath those people clothes still beat their furry little animal hearts. Well, the big wind comes up and it blows and it blows men's ties out, women's skirts up, and one gust blows all the little bears' clothes off. And for the first time they realize who and what they are. They go tearing back across a parking lot, back to a place they could just be themselves. Well, it wasn't so many years ago as a crow flies that I was getting ready for work, and I have a coat and tie, I start down my walkway, and a really big wind comes up, and it blows and it blows. The first gust blows my briefcase down the street. The second blows off my coat and tie. The third blows everything else away. And as I'm standing there completely amazed at this unlikely turbulence in my life, the only thing I could feel under those people clothes is this thudding of an animal heart. And I had flashbacks to all the times in my life that all I could think about was giving up my regular life, going off into the distance, maybe into the wilderness, building a small cabin and living in a more essential way. Well, it was a time of change for me, and I found myself at that how-to section of the library. I saw things like load bearing and R factor and coefficient. I said, well, you know, maybe building a house, even a small cabin, is a whole lot harder than I thought. Well, luckily for me, as I start back across the library, I happened to stumble on a stack of National Geographics. And maybe the first had an article about the barrios of Rio de Janeiro, in which a percentage of the population, the disenfranchised, have to go out into the highways and byways and pick up the cast-offs, the dendritis of urban life, and build them a place to live. So I know I'm not supposed to like this because these are really poor people, yet they've done an amazing job with the material that they had at hand. Or maybe it was an article about a tribe in the Amazon basin who had to go into the jungle and forage whatever was available in order to build the things they need. So I know these huts don't have any running water or electricity, but they're beautiful. They fit so well back in the environment from which they came. Or maybe it was a bird from Africa that had done an amazing engineering feat. So I know these birds are not smart enough to do this, but in human terms, this would be considered amazing craftsmanship. It was then I realized that maybe I wasn't a normal builder. Maybe I was a hunter and gatherer, some kind of an inspiration builder. And you know, I did get started on that house, and I learned some things while building it that really stood me in good stead in my art life. Maybe the first is really the simplest. It's learning to accept your progress. You know, if you don't know much about building, you put the window in the morning, by the afternoon you want to take that thing right back out again. I decided even before I began this process that I was going to do the very best job I could do. At the end of the day, I was going to accept my progress, and the next day I would build on it. The second thing is, if you use non-standard materials, like so many sculptors do, you can't always go to Lowe's and Home Depot and buy the things you need. And similarly, if you decide to cut a big tree down and use it as the mainstay of your house, how do you know it would work? And who would you ask? Well, I played a game with myself. I called giving it my one best shot. I said, if I'm the last person on earth and there's nobody else to ask, what do I think? Do I think it's strong enough? And somewhere along there, I began accepting responsibility for the kinds of things that I designed and made. The third thing is that working day in and day out in a very unself-conscious way, I began to see what I liked and what I didn't like. I saw how important personal preference is in making those kinds of decisions. And over a period of time, I began to develop my own sense of personal aesthetic. And finally, I saw how important need was in getting anything done. I really needed this house, so I was able to coalesce my best energies and direct my best problem-solving skills. And sometimes when I have a friend that's not doing that well with their sculpture, I'll say, hey, you have to figure out how to knead it. Well, I didn't know it was getting out of hand, but my neighbors did. They were always coming down to my house, kicking the dirt and scratching their head. And once my friend brought a relative from another area of the country, and he said, you know, I really like what you're doing here. You're a real artist. Well, maybe for all of you, that would be a great thing for people to say to you. But for me, it felt like the edge of the earth, and I kind of wanted him to take it back. Upon reflection, I realized that as a child, I thought being an artist was the greatest thing you could be. The only trouble was it seemed to come with this tremendous sense of social responsibility. You're supposed to do something great, something that saved people. And it had that corresponding onerous word talent. Somehow you were supposed to be talented. I knew what that word art and talent had to do with Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. I just couldn't figure out what it had to do with me or anything I was doing at my house. Well, one morning, as if by magic, I found myself standing in the entrance of the nearest art department taking sculpture courses and art history courses. And you know, for me, that minute, that day was the best day of my life. Because I didn't know there was anybody else like me. I didn't know there were lots of people out there who liked handling material, who liked seeing their ideas get worked out in 3 dimensions. The only trouble was I was kind of an art nerd, and I'd walk around to people and I'd say, is this art? Is this art? How come this person gets to paint this board blue and call it art? I was just about to hold forth again when one of the professors gets me by the throat, starts choking me to death, and says, who in the hell cares if it's art or not? Why don't you just go in there, make whatever you're going to make. Who's going to know the difference in 20 years anyway? And you know, I needed that permission giving. And I learned some things while I was in school that I think helped towards my continuation as a working artist. Maybe the first is the importance of a role model. Because I didn't know if you had to have a psychiatrist standing by when you made your first piece, or have great family upheaval, or do you have to go to New York and work as a waiter at Art and Qualified? It wasn't until I saw these relatively normal people who were intensely interested in making things that I realized there was going to be some hope for me. The second thing, it's hard to be a food faddist unless there are other people around who eat beans and rice. And similarly, it's hard to be a working artist unless there are other people around who understand what you're going through. I think my biggest challenge as a working artist is maintaining a sense of personal equilibrium, that in a society that rewards high culture but ignores individual makers. And it's easy to have an identity crisis at any time in your career in which one day you walk into your studio and for some reason you can't remember who made the work. It's only when you call away to a university, an art department that's nearby, or you have a friend at a distant location, and they say, yeah, I'm still working, where somehow you're relieved and able to go back to work. The third thing is I realized that there was a big difference between doers and viewers, between people who make things and people who look at them seriously. For me, it looked like 2 different jobs. Museum directors and curators and gallery owners, you know, their job is to decide what object might be one more inherently interesting than another, or where something fits in the lifeline of art. You know, that's not my job. I have to be true to my ideas. I have to, and sometimes when I begin working on something, I really don't know what I'm doing. And if at that point I had to decide whether something was significant or historically significant, or if it was good or not, I would just never get started. Excuse me. And finally, I had to deal with that word talent. And I decided, although talent wasn't irrelevant, it just wasn't the issue. I had the right to make what I wanted. You know, I could make as much work as I could afford. At some shimmering moment, I decided to quit school, go home, build a studio, and get to work. Well, you know, it's one thing to know you have a right to make something. It's another thing to know what you're going to make and how you're going to make it. And for me, I kept up with the university. I went to see a woman named Marty Zelt, who had been a seamstress in her life with 4 sculptures. She brought Velcro fasteners and cloth and zippers to her work. As I'm leaving that lecture, I'm saying, I wonder what I already know. I wonder what simple technology or some simple method of joining that I might already be familiar with. As I'm traveling along the road back to my house, I see all these saplings along the side of the road where maintenance crews strive to keep them down. And like Saul being struck off his horse on the way to Damascus, I had an epiphysis. I said, maybe I could use those. It wasn't so unusual that a woodsman like myself would see the potential of the saplings along his driveway because they're plentiful, they're renewable, just like having a giant warehouse always at your fingertips. After working with this material for a while, I realized that in fact I had a deeper resonance with it. I'd grown up in the woodlands of North Carolina. We have lots of underbrush and intersecting lines. And you know, as some kids laid in fields and looked at the architectural details of clouds, I found myself looking at the drawing quality of the winter landscape, all those hatch marks. So when I turned to sculpture, it seemed easy to co-opt the forces of nature and play that natural drawing style out on the surfaces of these works. Before I could get going, I had to figure out what birds and beavers and other natural shelter builders know about sticks. And that is that they have an inherent method of joining. If you drag a stick through the woods, you see what I mean, it entangles in everything. That's that infuriating tendency to tangle is what holds these pieces together. Every stick has a little flexibility, so if you flex it, pull it through a matrix and snaps back and holds itself in place. I mean, that's the how of the what. If you'd seen me at the moment, you'd taken pity on me. I could spend 5 minutes in a museum before running down the steps with sweaty palms and going, you know, they've used all the good ideas up. Or you'd review a few things in an art magazine and slam it shut and say, you know, they've exploited every material. Or you would hear that in the last census, over 1 million people in New York City alone claimed to be visual artists. Say there are too many of us. But after worrying about this for a while, I realized that I love to make things and the art world was just going to have to lump it. You know, I say about my work that I do large-scale temporary work, which I build on site from material that I gather nearby. I mean, have somebody else gather nearby. One of the great things about my work is that there's no studio doors to close and no place to hide. All my work is done in full public view. For some artists, that would be cloying, but for me, it seems like a kind of cultural exchange, one in which those people in that place and the energy of that place are folded back into the sculpture itself. You know, when I'm on site working, I like interceding for the arts, I like demystifying the process, but mainly, you know, I like reminding people that artists are just normal people who are looking for their rightful place in the world of work. So I'd like to show you a few images of my work and talk about it just for a minute. Maybe if I can operate this. This is a picture of my house. It's a simple house. I've gathered a lot of the material. Some of it I cut logs and so forth. Since that's been built, I've done a few little bit of additions, but I dug all those stones in my backyard. I've got a little porch on there now. I can look at the wall and say the bottom is not quite as good as the top, but I got better at laying stone over a period of time. The one thing that relates in terms of the house is that, you know, I collect stuff and build sculptures out of it, and at the same time, in the initial phase, I collected stones and logs and so forth and did the very same thing, gathering or garnering them from somewhere nearby. Cedars from my woods I put up in the ceiling, so you know, it has a kind of a natural feel. The inside of the walls are always, you put your best stones on the inside and the worst ones on the out. So the sequencing of materials is another thing that I do. We take our worst sticks, we put them inside the wall so you can't see them, and then festoon and dress with the better sticks on the outside. You know, I built this when I first started with all the sticks I cut out of my front yard, and since then, I've built lots of things, lots of little sheds for my neighbors, like little woven sheds and so forth. You know, I didn't know if anybody was ever going to build a monument to me, so I decided to build one to myself. So these stones I gathered along the roadways to and from town. I rarely cut stone, I just generally gather it and use it as I get it. You can see that I like feature stones and little goodies. I like the combinations of colors, you know, which we have a lot of in North Carolina. You know, my neighbors, they were always telling me that when their kids left home, things were going to happen. So this is called waiting it out in Maple. Of course, I have a lot of neighbors, so they'll put it down the road so they can see themselves. I wanted to show you a bit about material. This is red maple, which we use a lot of, and this is outside my studio. A lot of times you think of these pieces, you see them and you think the sticks must go on forever, but they really are bunches of little sticks and your eyes making the jump as they read the line. This is a piece where we are building a piece, and all the work is kind of addition, subtraction. You're taking away from the the piles and adding them to the sculpture. This was at the Heron School of Art in Indianapolis, and a lot of times we're looking for places. We asked the agricultural extension agent, and he said, well, they're building a golf course over there, you could have some of the sticks. So we're constantly kind of beating the bulldozer to the place. This is out in Wyoming. We were gathering out of somebody's lake who believed that if he cut the saplings out, there'd be less saplings, and so this is a lot more saplings that grew up in his lake, and we were able to take. In Hawaii, gathering on the slopes of a volcano there, gathering strawberry guava and eucalyptus and coffee tree and java plum and so forth. And in Ireland, we gathered off of a willow farm that they raised sticks for biomass, with the idea that these things could go to a high fire furnace and heat everybody's home. So they willows can grow on bad land, and they reproduce really fast, and so you can cut them as a crop about every 2 years. This is in Richmond, Virginia, just to say that we're constantly getting sticks, and sometimes we have to take the leaves off. So, and this was in early spring, so we picked all the leaves off of this, and this was the piece we made. It's a series of diamond-shaped cabanas, and they kind of reflect a bit of the building that's nearby. It's got a kind of a dome to it. I wanted to show you a piece from start to finish. This is a willow farm in Ireland, and in fact, this willow farm had been around for centuries. And prior in the medieval times, they used willow for about everything before they had plastics. And so every time you cut the stump, the stool, you get twice as many sticks. So it's a great material. I was working in Tala Community Arts Center in Dublin, and I wanted something that the public could see. They wanted me to work behind this wall because there are more than leprechauns in Ireland. There's a bit of crime and so forth, so they were afraid somebody would climb over the wall. And so I decided that I wanted to build something at least the neighbors could see. So this is at the roundabout, and as you drive around the roundabout, you get to see this tower. A lot of times around Dublin, there are all these Irish round towers that are from the 8th to the 10th century, and so it's a kind of vernacular architecture that everybody understands. Well, I've sprung it on a tree, and all the living limbs of the tree are outside of the sculpture itself. This is 2 years later, and so that was just before it came down. This is, I was at Cornell, and this is just another great patch of sticks. I wanted to show you, this is the gathering phase, this is the transportation phase, and then I was going to work in an area between their dorm and Performing Arts Center. You see I've marked out, or had marked out, all of the utilities underneath this plaza. Because the plaza had cracked up a bit, they were going to allow me to drill some holes in it with a concrete drill and drill in there. And
So the first thing I do, of course, is I make a bit of a sketch. In this case, I wanted to make a kind of companion piece for all these trees that were in the plaza. I wanted those companion pieces to touch the trees in different ways. And so I made my sketch, and then I laid that piece out, laid the footprint of it out, put these little white dots where I was going to drill the holes, set some structural pieces in there, and that's what we've done over on the site. If you go by the site, we drilled a series of holes after laying out a footprint, and then we have put these structural pieces in, which we proceed to bend into the shape that we want the piece to be. In this case, we set a scaffolding around the outside of them and pull and bend the shape to the scaffolding, and then after we've set the shape by weaving over it, we can cut it free. This is a bit taller than the ones that we're making over here, but that's our scaffolding system. And then this was at the opening. Everybody, there's 7 of these kind of pieces, companion pieces. I wanted to talk a bit about how I work. This is at the College of Art and Design in Savannah. And so oftentimes, this was a county jail. Of course, I thought about making escape hatches or magic carpet or some way to get out of jail. But this has been given over to this college so that they could turn it into a library, which has not happened as yet. But it will allow me to work on the surface of this, and do a kind of a flat piece. So what I always do, we started at the site here, is I work structurally first. And so underneath whatever we're building, we build a structure out of bigger pieces and bend it into shape. In this case, we've woven into the jail bars. Down at the site, we dug holes and put them in the ground. So our structural phase is in various ways, but it underpins what we're making. The second phase is our kind of is the aesthetic phase. In this case, you can see that once you build a canvas, then you can draw on it. And so you build this structural phase behind, and then you can outlay on your aesthetic. And finally, the cosmetic phase is to go back and do fix-up, so that you know, it's in the case of walking through something, it's safe to walk through it, and also that anything that you didn't like in the surface, you just erase by putting little small sticks over it. I wanted to talk about my work in terms of temporary, because all my work is temporary. This is a pink and white dogwood. I bent the limbs down and it started blooming, and then the leaves came on finally like this. I knew from an arborist I only had about 2 months that I could subject this tree to torture, and then I'd have to take the thing off. So ultimately we removed it. We're going to drag the piece behind a car down to the town dump, if you can believe it. They let us drag it down the street. It'll hold together because of that infuriating tendency of it to tangle. This was at Swarthmore College. You know, lucky for me, the tree that I was going to work on, they were going to take it down in 2 years. And so it had a strong vertical, and had all the limbs on the other side. So I was able to make this stacking piece called Abracadabra. It's about 50 feet tall, and I probably couldn't have done it without the help of the arborist there. But we set scaffolding, used a platform lift to get our scaffolding up there and our sticks up there, and then worked on taking it. And this was its winter configuration. This was its dramatic takedown. As I said, the work is temporary. They were going to cut the tree down 2 years, and they did it. This was a piece that was in Denmark at a sculpture park called Krakabakken. A lot of times in these nature parks, you have to gather the material within the park itself. I was trying to make a kind of a big guy that sought his own reflection in this when he thought about nature. So you could go up inside his body and look around and look out the face, and then the best part of it was that the area flooded in the wintertime, so you got an entirely different look, kind of more mythic look to the backside of it. This is 2 years later when the fallen hero there Sometimes, you know, if you could have made that, you would have liked it maybe even better than the one that you made. But so sometimes as nature acts on it, it looks pretty good. Excuse me. This was at Frederick Meyer Gardens in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and you know, all the every culture has made face jokes, and you know, of course, North Carolina potters are famous for their face jokes. This was my attempt at face jokes. So it was along a big glass wall. So you look at the sculpture, it looks back at you. And this was 2 years later. A huge 4-foot snow left these poor things screaming, knocked them over. And this was a piece at down at somewhere, and with the idea of Bramante's Tempietto, and it's called Sitting Pretty. And what the point is that we planted in bare-rooted trees, living trees, in the sculpture itself when we built it. And so this was about 5 years later, the trees, and then this was 7 years later, and now there's just a group of trees there, and it looks pretty good. I want to talk about my work in terms of drawing, because not only are these sticks that have the overtones of the woods, but they're lines with which to draw. And so everything you can do with your pencil, you can do the same thing with sticks. And so when we evaluate what we're looking at when we have a stick, we say, now this is a fat stick, this is a colored stick, this is a little stick. And so we're making lines. And when you hit a piece of paper with a pencil, you strike the paper with one weight and finish off with another. Basically, you're making a series of tapered lines. Since sticks are naturally tapered, if you organize the tapers in one direction, you get the sense of implied motion. And this is at the North Carolina Museum. It's the longest remaining piece. It's been up about 8 years, I think. It looks essentially exactly the same. It's about 70 feet long and 16 feet tall. So if you're over that direction, you can still go see it. It looks really pretty good. You can see that we're working on it. We use a platform lift to go along the wall, but very conscious about the drawing quality and using the color of the lines to help build luxurious surfaces. This was a piece at the Kohler Art Center in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. These pieces are woven into the superstructure of the building, so you can just go over and touch them. They're kind of hanging pieces that you can go inside. They're made out of red twig dogwood and willow, and so I really like it because I think they show the delicacy with which one can draw with sticks. And you can, if you take a red twig dogwood and you bring it inside in the winter, it holds its color. If you leave it outside or try to use it in the spring, it turns black. So, you know, it's a lot of times we're dealing with the finickiness of bark in order to get some kind of ideas across that we like. This was a piece in Denmark along on Langeland. You came off the ferry and then you cut around down the roadway, and then this was this is called Running in Circles. It was put into a grove of poplar trees. We just went across the road and gathered the sticks and brought them over and set some scaffolding up and made it. So, you know, there's a quickness and efficiency about working this way. This was at the World Trade Center. It's kind of big city calligraphy. At the time, if you worked for the, you know, the Trade Center, they said like, yeah, you can do something here as long as you don't touch the walls or the floors or the ceilings with sticks. So that gave me the idea. I saw people using ladders, and so I went down to Putnam Ladder Company and just borrowed a bunch of ladders. But you can see how you can upscale pieces using sticks to, you know, fill the space. So if one set of ladders is not enough, you can add some more, and until you've got a sense that you have got something that would count in that space. This is at the Phillips Collection. It's in their, what they call their new stairwell, which is kind of old. But anyway, I'm sitting on the outside of the building, looking down through the oculus. That's 3 floors of sticks. And the idea of these kind of little sticks, you know, coming to play in the kind of the architectural drawn surface there. And so what we did is I used a platform lift. This is about 16 foot wide in the center of that thing, so I was able to use a platform lift and spotter on the stairs, and so you get to talk to people the whole time. And so sometimes, and you know, you have to be really careful if you're working inside to not tear the paint off the wall and, you know, scuff things up, and bug proofing. And so like the piece at the North Carolina Museum you saw on the wall there, we had to freeze the material for 2 weeks at below zero. We have a guy that has a big freezer, and he can put a tractor trailer in there and freeze the sticks, and then we can use them. Fire retarding things is another big issue before you bring them in. This was at American Craft Museum in its old location in New York City, again capitalizing on the kind of the drawing quality of the architecture itself and playing off against it with these small sticks. You know, I use volunteers in my work, and this is in France. I'm working on a piece. I've got a barber that's working with me, and the pharmacist from down the road, and a plumber, and we just had a bunch of different people helping. And so, you know, often people say, well, how do these people know what to do? And I said, well, we've all been children. You know, for children, sticks are an imaginative object, and we know exactly what to do with them. So it doesn't take that long. You have a pile of sticks and say, would you all help me do this? That people can start working in pretty good ways. This is a piece we made. You can see I had too many bottles of Bordeaux. This is a sculpture park, and people, there are a number of restaurants around. People sit out there and drink wine at lunchtime. So it kind of gave me the idea of building these kind of bottles. I wanted to show you how many people it takes to build something. This was at Middlebury. Mainly I used students there. And so we built these kind of teepee-shaped pieces that are all hooked together. And they had to be big enough and had to have a shape that was discernible from the road. So sometimes you're always asking yourself, where do people start seeing this from? So if they're going to see it from the road, it's got to be big enough and have an outline that could be seen from the road. This was in somewhere. It's a Garden of Curiosity, and so we had made these big pieces, and it was snowing, terrible rain, and we had these stalwart students came and helped us. This was the piece in Richmond, Virginia. All these people came out to help me, and I hope we'll get a picture here of all the people that helped us too. This is a day at the office for me. People are coming around talking to you the whole time. This was at the University of Michigan, and you know, there's a recurrent story, and that is while a couple will come up to talk to us, and while the wife is talking to me, the husband will be surreptitiously trying to push the sculpture over with his shoulder, and the wife will say, honey, we could live here. And he'd say, we can't live here. But what I've come to understand about that statement is that, you know, sometimes people just want to give up their regular life like I dreamed of doing and just go off and talk to the animals for a while and just go to the woods and just exist without all their worldly possessions. So there's a kind of a Garden of Eden part of each one of us as we kind of dream what we would do and what we like. Sometimes there's impromptu openings. I was working in New Harmony, Indiana, and we stopped and took the scaffolding away, and everybody in town came over to see what we were doing, and people, you know, they were half shaved coming out of the barber shop and so forth. This was in Ireland because a lot of times kids, they come on the bus whether it's raining or not. In Chicago, a couple people came out to see what we were doing. You know, people send me pictures all the time. I don't know who this is, but I know where it is. It was in Houston. Those are Houston feet. Now, sometimes, you know, hairstyles are governed by culture. You know, people get their hair done and they say, make it look like that. And you can understand this as kind of the need for fairies, but can you understand this? People send me things like they've had fashion shows, they climb up on there. I don't know how. Maybe they fly. Well, how about that? Somebody actually sent me this. It actually happened, I think. Well, anyway, I wanted to talk finally about my work in 3 different ways. One, I've worked with architecture, and I like the idea that architecture can be a foil for an ancient way of working. And so this is at the DeCordova in Lincoln, Mass, where my imagination was that this tower was falling back to its form of origin as a serf's hut. So, you know, it's one thing to say you're going to do it, but then they didn't want me up on that roof, so I made a mock-up of the tower top and picked it up with a crane and set it up there like a dunce cap. But even so, we got it up there and it looked the line quality looked so small that we got a bucket truck up there and, you know, got up there. It's 70 feet up to the top, but they lifted me up there and I was able to reinstall some heavier lines to make it look pretty good. You know, this is down in Florida, the attack of the insects on this building. But a lot of times, you know, get an opportunity to play around with the facade of a building. This was out in Hollywood, but Max Azri is one of their stores giving this store a case of the Paisley cloth. And we had almost numerous accidents. While people would see this, they just stopped their car right in the middle of the street. I've also worked with trees, and this is a piece that was built around this oak tree, and it sits in front of a little temple. And the temple was built 400 years before, and the tree was planted as a memorial to the temple. You know, in Japan, a lot of the sacred trees have rice rope around them. They have kind of a cornucopia. So this is what my imagined result was. And so I used the bamboo that was there and also some reeds and so forth that I gathered. You can see it sits itself up there. I had some Occidental kids come and visit me with their parents, so they crawled up inside of the thing. Also, I used the overtones of trees. So this was down in Savannah under this live oak tree, this kind of architectural folly. And, you know, looking up through it, you could see these kind of source limbs above it, and it dropped a lot of Spanish moss down into the thing. It looked really pretty good. This is in Hawaii. I was working at the Contemporary Art Museum, which is now part of another museum, but using this monkey pod tree in the trunks as a foil for this piece that goes up and over the limbs and comes down in kind of a bookend form. This was a piece I showed you about the impromptu opening, but this is a piece at New Harmony, Indiana. It sits at the corner of an old main street, so it's got kind of reflective fenestration as well. What I liked about this is that it was a hornbeam hedge that didn't really have anything underneath it, so I was able to capitalize on that space under the hornbeam hedges. The great thing was this was its winter configuration, so you had all that verticality developed as the leaves fell off, and it really looked pretty good. This was a piece at Morris Arboretum in Philadelphia. You know, it started out as a snail shell from my little fish pond, and it ended up, you know, well, maybe it's a layer cake, or maybe it's a Japanese hairstyle from the 14th century, and finally it just got to be Dr. Zhivago in the Summer Palace. So it kind of had this, sometimes we'll just do something I had never done before, which is make billows on the surface of a piece. This was, that piece is gone. This is the new piece that was sitting there. We made it in the same spot. It's kind of like dancing huts. And this is a piece from private commission in North Carolina. So, you know, sometimes I don't have any trees to work on. I don't have any architecture to spring into. So I've developed this style of making things like we're making here, where they start with sticks in the ground and then forming some kind of an idea that's played out. So what I like about this piece, it's all sticks. You know, there's no wire. There's no string. It's just holding itself together by that infuriating tendency of the thing to tangle. This was a piece, because we have to make things that stand on their own inside of buildings sometimes. A piece of Brussels called Sleepwalking. It's 27 feet tall, so it fills up this big space. Sometimes we have to be really tricky about how we do things. A piece that was in the Ohio Valley, where they have a lot of serpent mounds. And so this is taken from the top of the building. They're never like real snakes, but they're like serpentine things. This was at Purdue. A piece at Bowdoin College. Learned to, foil the snow by hooking things together at like right at your waist, so that these big pieces stood and formed a group that held that out against the snow. This was a piece that has just come down. It was at St. John's in Minnesota. It's five little chapels in the land of the saints. All the towns are named for saints, and so this was its winter configuration. But this was its real winter configuration. This is when it drops at 30 below. So I love that. That was a frosted cake if I ever saw one. And then sometimes this was at the Museum of Glass at its opening, and trying to use this pool to extend the sculpture through reflection. And a piece at the Peabody Essex with this kind of, this was Salem's the House of the Seven Gables, so we had to put a gable there. And this was its winter configuration. Looked pretty good. It's set right on the corner of a street where everybody had to stop for the stop line and really could see it well. And a piece down in South Carolina at the Performing Arts Center. And so these things set at the nexus of streets that all came together, so one face looked down each of the streets. It's called Ain't Misbehavin'. A piece that we just constructed up in Canada, in Montreal. We've started doing a few of these pieces that have this really heavy coil around the top. Makes it look really finished. That's the way it kind of comes off as a final product. Oh, what I wanted to show you is how many people would come to see a sculpture burned. This is everybody in Scotland. They came, they knew a year ahead that this thing was going to get burned and they were going to set it on fire. Lots of dancing. This was the piece in question. It's made out of after the Callanish standing stones, these big Neolithic stones that stand. And so we made our own version of that. This is the scale. This is the scaffolding guy that came and brought me my scaffolding. This is that fateful night that the thing got set on fire. This was the next morning. These are the dancers that are cooking their breakfast on my sculpture. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. So I hope you all will come down and see what we're doing, if you're not already working on it.
Question?
That's good, we've answered them.
Are you ever sad when you have to take them down or they come down?
Not really. Well, maybe I will when I retire, I'll be sad, but we're always looking for the next one, For makers, the making is the issue. For conservators is preserving it, But Sam and I, we're interested in making the next piece, taking the challenge that goes with those pieces. We feel like by bedding them well in the community through using volunteers and also having an open door policy, that by the time that we're finished with it, people are interested enough to take it and, take care of it and like it. So a lot of times if you're doing a painting and you have a gallery show, people come the night they drink, nobody else ever comes to see the work. But this is not true in the situation we're in. People are flooding around the piece all day long, every day. They love to see the process of building. It's more of an inherent part of the piece, and second guessing it, and also living vicariously through the people who are out there working on it. Sometimes as pieces come to the end, passerby will stop and say, "You're ruining it, don't do anything else." So you can see that they've taken a vested interest in the sculpture itself. Yeah.
Do you have any work that will survive and that is not ephemeral? As a museum ever commissioned to work for permanent installation?
Well, the one in North Carolina, at the North Carolina Museum is probably the most permanent. There's no reason a work couldn't last inside, but generally, I'm not sure there will be, except for just documentation, that there'll be a work that lasts. You can cast it in bronze, but you know, sometimes you see the effect of taking sticks and putting them in bronze, and you know, they might sell, but they don't have the real feelings that go with the longing that goes with knowing something's going to pass away. You have to go look at it. You have to enjoy it. You know, I think that temporary has really refocused people's attention on the essentials of what art really is. You go there, you look at it, you like it. You know, you want it, and so that's, I think, is a part and parcel of the work that I do. So I just have to live with the fact that I get one bit of value out of that, but I don't have anything that, you know, that you could carry home and put in your house. Yeah.
Two things. One is those dry stone walls are amazing. That was just when you go to your house.
Well,
Monument. Those are dry stone, right?
Do you have mortar in the walls of your house? Or dry stack?
Oh, the one in my house is got mortar in it. I practice this thing of raking it just as it's hardening and then sponging it. And it knocks the mortar back in a way that looks like a kind of a natural contour. The ones that I built outside are dry stacked, and I've dry stacked a lot of different kinds of walls and so forth. But, yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about the process of how you chose the site here at Davidson and what it is relating to, at least from your view?
Well, one thing was we looked around a lot of different places. We looked over by the art center here. There's a lawn out beside you. The problem with that is that there's a set of bushes that block the traffic from seeing into that space. Not many people use that sidewalk, and the students live over on the other side. So I thought, you know, putting it out on campus itself. We looked around campus because of your returning graduates, and they put tents all over the campus. A lot of places that are already spoken for. And so, you know, we looked at different things, but decided on this kind of pocket park that's set by the library as being central to the campus itself. You could see it. There was a lot of students passing by it. And then, you know, we wanted to use that space well. So I got this wild idea of looking at some work from Ghana where they use mud brick, and they stack and they make a wall, and then they have these buttresses. Well, they can't do very well any better than at architecture than we can with sticks. They form these things out of mud, and so they're kind of all this kind of willy-nilly kind of architecture. And so that gave me the idea of trying to work that way in this specific case. And we've got two kind of courtyards. We've got a gate that goes from one courtyard to another, and then we've got a series of buttresses and towers that I think will make an interesting architectural impression on you when you walk in and through it. So it's meant to walk through, to look out, you know, there's a feeling. There's also the smells that go with sticks, and being able to look at the sky, look at all the other trees while you're looking at this kind of configuration. It just, I think that it gives you a really pleasant sensation. Yeah.
Since that neighborhood is crowded a little bit with other sculptures, I'm just wondering if, as you're conceptualizing your piece, if it speaks in some way or relates to the various sculptures that are already there.
Well, I'm in good company.
Yes.
That's what I have to say. You know, it was great that we've got a quorum down there. I tried not to overwhelm it, but I can't help myself. Mine will be gone soon. Those will stay. Yeah.
I was just curious, as someone who cares very deeply about the environment and spends a lot of time out in the woods, and whose own work is very influenced by that natural world, how consciously you decide what trees you are using in that space. If, like, I grew up in Cincinnati that was bombarded by honeysuckle, for instance, as an invasive species that changes the structure of the forest.
Yeah.
Do you ever think about the things that are around in that way and what you're actually harvesting?
Well, when we're, if we're working in a place that can't really do it, then like we just worked at the U.S. Botanic Garden in Washington, D.C., and they just had no energy, so we ordered the material. And that comes from a farm, and so they're farming that material constantly. They have to cut it back for it to come up again. Unfortunately, we're using Russian olive here, which is a bane of our existence, but it is a very invasive species. Like if you know about forest succession, a lot of trees are always dying underneath the canopy, and the bigger trees are growing up. A lot of times we'll find places where there's going to be a development, or there has been a store closing, and the backyard has grown up with lots of sticks. What sticks result from is urbanization, because they're cutting the forest down, and before these sticks will come back up, and then before the bulldozer can come again, we're out there. Could we have your, But some things like honeysuckle are not a viable stick. There's a lot of things that people would love us to use, but we really cannot use them because they just don't bend, or too stiff, they're ugly. So we try, but it's not a complete situation.
So you talked some about building structures and then kind of building out from that and how the sticks tend to tangle, but how do you really put the sticks together? If that makes sense, like if you take a stick, how do you form it into that structure into a larger shape?
So like if we wanted to make a dome, we would set a circle out, we might put some sticks around the side of it, we'd bring all the sticks together like this, and maybe entangle them a little bit, then we'd weave over it,
Okay.
and just weave in and out different ways, and then it would lock it up, and then it's got a shape, and then we could work on that shape. So, all the domes in the world are right here in your hands, Russian dome, like this. So, if you take and put a dome on top of any kind of a circular situation, you get this kind of temple look. If you put a rim around it this way, it looks like architecture. If you put pilasters on it, you get another look. If you put stuff like, like this, you can ape another kind of look. So we just,
It's just interesting to see the final products and then just individual sticks coming into that.
Right, and right now, we'll start polishing the work next week, and so you get about 15% more out of the work after you work on it again. So we try to true it up to a pretty good spot, and then Sam and I go around and really focus on it. And the cleaning up and the reasserting line, because it really is about drawing. You'll lay certain lines on that tend to enhance it and tend to make a gradation of line between little lines, medium-sized lines, and big lines. And so that relationship and the depth that you can get in the surface will make it look a lot better. So we think it constantly about drawing. Yeah.
I have a question for you. How, in general, how closely do your end products resemble what you have in your head when you start?
Pretty closely, because all the objects we're making are simple shapes. We can't make something that's super specific, but I dream of something and say, it should be kind of like this. And as we're working on it, we're working towards that kind of inner thought. But at the same time, the materials can only do certain things, and we are discovering what that is as we're working. So sometimes we'll set a precedence on one piece of it, and we'll say, we know we can work with it that way. Throughout this piece, we will establish the rule that we will work with this material this way. So it's a constant discovery process. And as you lay the materials into the next shape and the next shape, you do get a a bit of difference, but you know, for one piece, you're kind of be consistent throughout one effort. If you think of something or you come up with something new, you might hold that to the next time you work. So we're working somewhere every month where it takes 3 weeks to build a piece. I'm never home. My wife still loves me. Now I've got my son that travels with me, so that makes kind of taking your family with you. Yeah.
I've noticed you burned one piece just fell on its own, another you dragged away. Is there a plan at the start on how the piece will end?
Well, you know, the one in Scotland was extreme because they had all this open space, they could set it on fire. Sometimes it gets chipped, you know, bring a chipper. Sometimes it just gets hauled away. A few times it's been thrown in a lake so that it could be fish food or, you know, could be some kind of thing. Generally what happens is that it starts looking less, and the organization has the right to take it down whenever they want to. We hope that it would last 2 years. In this case, we installed some cedar posts, basically the top of little cedar trees in the ground with this, so that if at the end of its, getting towards the end of its life, if those things rot off, it can't coast because we've got these kind of pegs in there. So we think we'll make it for 2 years. It takes a little bit of upkeep. So for the first couple of weeks, somebody will have to look at it every day and make sure that nobody dislodges sticks. But after a little while, this thing's dry in that shape. So sticks are, you know, they weigh half as much or a third as much, 2/3 as much in a couple of months, and they're twice as strong. So for a certain period of time, you have a really, and if you put your shoulder to these pieces that we're making down there, you see how tough they really are. You could hit it with a car and it would not even move. It is really tough. Because you're plying it, you're putting lots of plies going different directions. It makes really a tough surface. Yeah.
To what extent do your ideas stem from the location, and to what extent do they come to you elsewhere and you bring them in and see how they will incorporate into the environment?
Well, usually we don't really start thinking of a piece till the day before. I mean, it sounds, but what it is, you know, it's easy to come up with an idea. It's hard to do the idea. And so, you know, a lot of times when we're building things, we find that we're relating. Scale is always a huge issue. So in order to relate well to a site, you have to find the proper scale to fit it, to fit that site. At the site we have down there, there's a tree. I can't remember. You know what that tree is? It's a Chinese tallow tree that's in the middle of our thing. And so it was an impediment when we first laid the piece out, and then we made it into a feature because we wanted this kind of double courtyard. We wanted it to fit in that space well. You know, you want to leave margins, viewing margins for things, and so that helps with the success of it. And you know, generally, because simple shapes are everywhere in your environment, you start making associations with the shapes themselves. And sometimes the way we'll finish things off have kind of correspondence with the places we are at, and and of course the birds help us. They come and make nests that look like our stuff.
One more. Outside of the holes that you put in the ground, when everything's finished, is there anything other than the sticks holding it together?
No. We put dirt back down in the hole because we think that it'll last for a couple of years, and then we cut all our string loose that we've used to kind of shape and form it, and so that it's thoroughly sticks, which I like the idea of, that you could build something that just would be in and of itself and be really like hunting and gatherers that just had no resource except what they could find. I really like that part of it. Yeah.
Does this installation have a name?
Not yet. Have you got one? No, we will start soliciting names very soon. We're in our second week. We've got one more week. So we'll be saying, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? Have you got a name?
Think about it.
Thank you all very much, I really appreciate it.